Okay, so I'm open to questions if you guys have them.
Most of the people in their 20s in uni like me who think about marriage, I guess, one of the reasons that stops me from even considering that option is that before I get into a commitment, I need to be responsible about it. And to be responsible about it, you want to have a stable job, you want to have money, I guess, to be able to afford to take care of yourself and your partner and your future family. And in some ways, I think it might be a bit irresponsible to jump into that commitment and not have that, I don't know, that protection, I guess. How can you justify that point?
It's a great question. And what I would say is that I think we have to also recognize, and this goes to the point about men in particular, and I'm glad that you asked this question as a young man, is that marriage tends to make guys especially more responsible. And so what we see is that after men get married, typically they work harder, they work longer hours, they make more money, and they're more strategic in how they approach their work. In part because they have the advice and counsel of a wife who's often probably wiser in the ways of the world than they are themselves. But no, I mean, concretely, we know, for instance, that in the United States, and this is true though across much of the world, men who are unhappy with their jobs and who are not married are more likely just to quit without finding another job before they quit. Whereas men who are married will find the second job before they quit the first job. And that's just one example of how getting married actually changes men's behavior in ways that make them better workers, more strategic. So I think part of the idea is recognizing that marriage may actually be a gift to you that will enable you to be more intentional, more strategic, and more responsible about how you approach either your schooling or your work in ways that will redound both to your benefit but also to the benefit of your future family.
Hi, thanks for the talk so far. You touched on a point before about how, despite marriages being put off, children are still being conceived when adults are in their 20s. There was an article in the MX, which is a rather widely distributed newspaper, today about how contraception education has failed essentially in its current form because there are a lot of people between 18 and 25 who, despite using contraception, are still having about a 1 in 2 unintended pregnancy rate. And they blame this on the education system being focused on condoms and the pill rather than other types of contraception, so like temporary sterilizations and things like that. These kinds of things assume that sex is just going to happen for people in their 20s, and presumably these unintended pregnancies are happening outside of marriage. So after that long-winded introduction, my question is this problem with marriage being put off because of our culture's false view of sex? And is the solution to this embedded within our sex education within schools?
Okay, well, I think on the sex front, there are two different things that are going on here. On the first thing I would say is that part of the reason that people are postponing marriage to later and later ages is that sex is fairly easy to have at any time you'd like to have, basically. And this point kind of came home to me when I was talking to a law school student at the University of Georgia who was cohabiting with his girlfriend at that point. And I just happened to ask him in the course of our conversation, would you be married if you couldn't have sex with your girlfriend? And he's like, uh-huh. So I think part of the story is people are postponing marriage because of the sort of the easy access to sex that our culture offers to young adults today. But another reason I think why folks are postponing marriage is that they have a kind of an overly idealized view of marriage. It's kind of a soulmate model of marriage, that your spouse is going to fulfill you in some kind of deep and profound way. And that you don't kind of move to marriage until you have all your ducks in a row, that you're personally where you want to be, you're financially where you want to be, you're emotionally where you want to be, and the same thing is true for your partner. And that's a lot of ducks to get in a row before one gets married. So that soulmate model of marriage also, I think, feeds into the delayed approach to marriage. But the problem then, of course, is that people are still having sex in their late teens and their 20s, and many folks are conceiving kids and often bringing them to term, and then raising them outside of the bonds of marriage. And that's problematic because the world over, from Sweden to Australia to the US, kids who are born outside of marriage, even to founding couples, are much more likely to see their parents part ways because they're not enjoying the stabilizing and the social and the cultural and religious power that marriage tends to offer adults and kids. Now, on the question of sex ed in school, frankly, I don't think in that, from the conservatives who would argue for abstinence and liberals who would say comprehensive sex education in the States, I don't think it's really either one. I don't think it's really that all powerful. I think what's much more powerful is the popular culture and the peer culture that people find themselves in. Those two cultural forces, I think, are much more consequential in shaping how people think about and engage in sex, or in a minority context, don't engage in sex, before marriage. So.
Okay, one up here on your right.
Hey, howdy. In a practical way, what advice would you give to young couples that are trying to overcome the anxiety and fear associated with marrying at a young age, especially given the social stigma overall?
The social stigma of getting married young, you're saying? Or just of marriage in general?
Well, the fear of marriage at a young age.
Well, I would say a couple of things. One is that I think we have to recognize that, particularly I think for men, we tend to mature a little bit later than the ladies. And so it's not necessarily the worst thing in the world to wait a little bit for folks in their 20s to make sure that, especially the guy, I think, has the maturity to move forward. But it's also, I think, important too to think about your friends and your family. And as I sort of alluded to in the conclusion, we don't have a formal courtship approach in our culture anymore. But in lieu of that, groups like this to some extent can be helpful. So if you're dating, if you're courting someone, I think it's wise to kind of seek out the advice of your friends or family members who you trust and get their view of this person. If they give that person a thumbs up, it's probably a sign that this actually could be something you should really move forward in terms of marriage. And then a third point that I would say is that you should be really integrated into a local church community, because folks who are getting married in their 20s who are not embedded in some kind of community that's going to give them support, counsel, and will be there for them when the times are tough, I think are going to have a much more difficult time of it than folks who are embedded in a real community of some sort. So those would be three things I think one can think about when it comes to getting married in your 20s today.
So about the front end.
Hi Brad, what happens statistically if you have, say, a bigger age gap between the male and female?
What we see historically in the research is that having men who are a bit older, or men and women who are at the same age, seems to be a pretty good approach. Whereas when the woman is older, that tends to be a little more risky. And I think partly it's about the maturity issue, because men tend to mature a little bit later than women do. And I think part of it too can be that in those contexts, in that sort of non-traditional age context, the wife may be more dominant or assertive in ways that that might be challenging for the marriage. But so generally it looks like folks who get married when he's older, when they're about the same age, that's sort of, those two patterns work pretty well. Back in the over there.
Another one just here.
Hey, how's it going?
Good.
That's good. Well, what do you reckon of the idea of couples not being able to afford to get married, so they wait until there's financial stability or a full-time job, something like that?
Well, I don't think that money is irrelevant, but I think one has to be careful in not inflating your expectations of what counts as a good, financial floor for marriage. So I think one should have some sense that there's a good prospect. It may not be there right now, but that, maybe you're in graduate school and you think, a year or two, you'll be in a good position. And so you can go ahead and get married at that point. But it's also, I think, we should remember that our grandparents and great-grandparents often would marry with, nothing to them and on a very minimal income. And it's not, on our own possibility. So it's an important criterion, but it's certainly not, it's not one that you should use to indefinitely postpone marriage, particularly if you're in a serious relationship and this person seems like a good potential spouse, is what I would say about that. So.
Okay, we've got one up the back, just in front of you.
Hi, Doctor. Thank you for your excellent talk. My question is, my grandfather married a woman 20 years his junior, my dear grandmother. Can a marriage like that work today, according to your statistics?
That would be pretty unusual today. What we've seen is that people are marrying folks who are closer in age to them. That's the sort of typical pattern. But as I said, sort of what seems to work better is when he's older or when he's about the same age as his wife. So your grandfather's, case is just sort of the extreme expression, of one of those two patterns. But I would say, the bigger thing in that kind of situation is, once again, do the friends and family think this is a wise idea? Because when two people are in a relationship, particularly at the beginning of that relationship, they often don't have a real perspective on that. There's a chemical reaction that sets in. People have a very strong attraction to one another, and that may cloud their judgment. And a concrete example I would give, I guess here in Australia you have Labour and the Liberal parties, correct? One's more conservative and one is more progressive. Well, when I was in college as a senior at the University of Virginia, we had the head of the college Republicans, our conservative party on campus, and a progressive senior woman. We were living in this sort of the quad, basically, the center of our college. And they were both attractive people, and they were really attracted to one another, I think mainly physically. And they dated briefly, but there was no foundation for them in terms of a friendship. They had very different ideological viewpoints. So, the point I would make is that you want to make sure that the person that you're marrying is a great friend. And that, when you're both old and wrinkly on the front porch, in your 70s, you're going to have, a foundation of friendship that will sustain you, beyond that initial physical attraction.
I've got one in the front here.
Hello, I'm also from America. Woo! Okay, so I'm just curious that, if you've got all your ducks in a row, you're satisfied with each other's, or you've got your money set up, you've got a great life for you, everybody's got good character, upstanding people, etc. Other than sort of Song of Songs, does the Bible really have that much to say about an emotional connection between people? Because I'm just looking, I didn't know about this, so this is my first time tonight, but I was actually just praying about it last night. I'm like, God, what does your Bible have to say about, connecting with another human being that you plan to spend the rest of your life with?
Well, I think it goes back to this question of friendship, and I would respond not necessarily in a biblical sense, but just to sort of make the point that in the larger sort of Catholic and classical tradition, we talk about the virtue of friendship, and Thomas Aquinas talks about willing the good of the other. But part of willing the good of the other, I think, is having a common conception of the good life for yourselves as a couple. And so you want to have certain goods, whether it's the faith or a commitment to a certain political cause, or to, bowling, or what's a popular sport here in Australia? What, cricket? Or cricket, okay? But there are these goods that you two can share as a couple that ground your friendship as a married couple. And I think if you have a strong friendship, the emotions typically will come along with that and will be part of that friendship. But at the same time, recognizing that grounding a marriage on emotions is not a particularly wise idea. because there are going to be times in a marriage when your spouse annoys you, angers you, disappoints you, etc. And so, you have to have that deeper commitment to willing the good of the other, willing the good of your spouse, if you hope to go the distance.
Okay, I've got another one in the same spot.
Unfortunately, these days, most young men are addicted to pornography. Do you think, well, like a lot of them, do you think it's okay for the girl for the woman to compromise and marry a guy who's addicted to pornography?
Well, the short answer is no. Yeah, it's a huge, pornography is a big issue. I was talking to a colleague this morning at the airport as we got off the plane, also about gaming, how a lot of young men spend a lot of hours just gaming. And so I think that we have to be sort of cognizant of the ways in which there are many behaviors today that are linked to our electronics. Maybe even the fact that I probably check my iPhone every couple of minutes on a regular basis, that we need to work on in terms of trying to sort of rein in these vices that can really distort our humanity and our ability to really relate to other people in an authentic way. And certainly pornography would be probably number one on that issue. But I think in terms of confession is one way of addressing that. Being involved in a community that will hold men accountable is the second way to address that issue. And trying to cultivate the virtue of prudence and avoiding situations that would put you into a situation of temptation is a third thing to stress in that kind of context. But I would certainly say that you want to get that problem addressed before the wedding date, obviously, would be key.
Down the back. Yep.
Hi, my friend is very into religion. His particular situation is the girl he's deeply and very much in love with is not at the same level he is. She believes, however, she can be at a 30% level compared to his 100%. How does that play, and what is your opinion?
Well, I think my big concern when it comes to religion is whether or not they're on the same basic page. So if she is, say, Muslim and he is, evangelical Protestant, that would be a big problem. Whereas if she is Catholic and he's Catholic, I think it's much less of a problem. So the ideal is for folks to get married with a very strong shared faith orientation. That's both the happiest and the most stable approach to marriage. But in this world we live in, it's often hard to find that particular arrangement. So I think having a pretty clear understanding of what you're going to do after you get married in terms of particularly raising children is crucial. And marrying in the faith is ideal. And when you seemingly can't do that, you may have to discern if the person you're with, would be a good spouse. But if they have I think where I definitely would say I would advise against marriage is when one person is committed strongly to one faith, the other person is committed strongly to a different faith, or one is committed strongly to one faith, the other person is committed to secularism of one stripe or another. So if there's a kind of moderate commitment on the part of one and deep commitment on the part of the other, that's pretty good. Not ideal, but pretty good. There's a question over here.
Yes.
Okay.
Hi, Brad. Just a quick question. You didn't mention arranged marriage in your studies. I was just wondering whether you came across that. And my second question is what your view is on arranged marriage.
So, well, certainly in many cultures, through time and space, arranged marriage has been quite common. And I think when arranged marriage works well, when the parents and the community are really looking to the sort of welfare of their kids, it seems to work pretty well, as we see in India, for instance, in many cases. But it's not consistent with sort of the Anglo approach, probably defined, Australian, American, etc., stress on the importance of the individual and of their choices being key when it comes to marriage. But as I said before, I think we have to realize that we are social animals, and we have friends and family members. And as a sort of rough way of approximating some of the virtues of arranged marriage, we should really rely upon our friends and family to give us guidance in terms of the kinds of qualities we might want to look for, maybe suggestions about who might be a good spouse. And once we are seriously dating someone or courting someone, we should get, as I said before, the input of our family and friends, because they'll have that perspective oftentimes that we don't have. So those are ways we've got to approximate to some degree some of the benefits of arranged marriage in our own more individualistic context.
Our generation has been, well, society's expectations of our generation as far as tertiary education are probably a lot higher than previous generations. So a lot more of our generation are doing long and expensive academic studies post high school before we move on to the workforce. So you tend to, when you are studying, you're in a bit of a bubble. The impressions that are placed on you are different to when you're sort of working. You've got a lot more freedoms when you're studying that you don't have once you enter the workforce. There's obviously an increased delay in sort of getting on with life in our generation than perhaps our parents, or particularly our grandparents, who, in our grandparents' generation, most people, by the time they were early 20s, were already working full-time and, at that stage. Is that contributing to the delay to get married, or is it just a coincidence?
No, it's really one of the factors that's driving the delay in marriage. People feel like that they need to and they have to get that extra education to pursue a career in medicine or in law or in business or whatever it might be, education. And what I wanted to say to that reality, though, is that we also should recognize that there's no reason that having a ring on your finger makes it impossible for you to go to graduate school. And in fact, we know once again that for men are actually more likely to move through like a PhD program on a timely basis if they're married compared to men who are not married. So I think we need to sort of rethink to some extent our sort of assumption that we have to postpone the marriage until after that graduate degree is completed.
Hi, Brett. My question is, you noted that more and more people are having children out of wedlock. How does that impact on their marriages further down the track and the chances of success?
I have a three-word response, and I'll expand upon that, but it's baby, mama, drama. Okay? You heard that term in the US? Baby, mama, drama. Okay? It's not a good thing. So the problem with having kids outside of marriage is that people are more likely to break up and move on to a new relationship, including getting married to someone else who's not the father of their child or their kids. And that can lead to any number of challenges. When people have kids with different partners, it's difficult to navigate the different parents, the financial obligations, trying to spend time with a kid who you may not be living with at that point. So the beauty of waiting to have kids until you're married and then staying married to the same person is that all that drama doesn't have to take place.
As a young Catholic man who's currently discerning marriage, would you have any good pickup lines or tips?
Well, I have to confess that the day after I got engaged to my wife, she said that her biggest concern about me was that I wasn't very funny. So I really am not gifted in that kind of department. The way that actually I met my wife was reading First Things, which is a journal of religion and public life. You probably can get First Things here, at least in the web in Australia, in the library. I saw her reading it, I was reading it, and that was sort of the point of connection for us. So the point I'm making is that part of it's about maybe saying certain things, but also can be about doing certain things that signal the kind of guy that you are, to women that are in your environment that may notice that and appreciate that. So,
thanks, Mr. Wilcox, for coming. Firstly, have you had a cold beer yet? They're having cold over here.
no, I haven't had a cold one yet.
Oh, mate, you got to get one of those in here. Listen, I was just wondering, what are your thoughts on intercultural relationships? How that, what kind of issues and what kind of statistics support the intercultural relationship, even if the religion's the same?
Well, I think we have this principle called homogamy in sociology, which basically means that similarity tends to facilitate stability. So the more similarities there are with, in your case, say a girlfriend, the better. And if there are tremendous, differences between sort of the way you were raised, or the culture that you were raised in, or the community that you were raised in, and that your girlfriend was raised in, that's going to be a challenge, and you need to have your eyes wide open about that. But I would also say too that if you have a strong faith commitment as a couple, that commitment I think can certainly compensate for those challenges. But you should be, I think, clear-eyed and recognizing that, say, if you're dating a Filipina woman, for instance, that there are going to be some challenges to that are just, a consequence of the fact that you're coming from very different places as you move into marriage and family life more generally.
Just here.
G'day, thanks for your talk today. I'm probably a bit older than what your target market is at the moment, and I'm already married. I did get married in my 20s. My question to you is, how do you think people perceive the sacrament of marriage? Do they still see it as something that is sacrosanct? Do they still respect the fact that it's before God and it's something that's forever? Is that the way that it's still perceived?
I think starting, at least in the States, in the 1970s, there was a pretty dramatic move away from viewing marriage as a sacrament in the Catholic community. There was a real dramatic increase in divorce, obviously, in the Catholic Church. I think that's probably true, obviously, to a large extent here in Australia as well. So that sort of sacramental vision of marriage as a covenant, as a vocation, as something that is the recipient of God's grace, we have lost that understanding to a large degree. But I think there is a sort of minority of Catholics, I'm guessing this group would be maybe emblematic of that minority, who are reappropriating, rediscovering that sacramental vision of life for themselves and for their marriages. But it's certainly a minority view.
Having said that, do you think that through your studies that it's shown that if there was an increase in the perception of it being a holy sort of sacrament, would it lengthen the length of marriage? Would it stop or halt the divorce rate or reduce it in any way?
Yeah, most definitely. We know that basically couples who have a strong commitment to marriage as a lifelong relationship are more likely to go the distance, but they're also more likely to invest in the relationship, to invest in one another. So having that sense of security and stability about the future allows for more investments in the present. I haven't seen the show Girls until actually the flight over this morning from the United States. But what's striking about this new show on HBO is just how kind of provisional these young adults living in Brooklyn, but there's such a very provisional view of relationships, a very self-centered view of relationships. There's no commitment, there's no long-term time horizon, and they're miserable. And they're hurting one another, literally physically hurting one another oftentimes. And I think the sacramental vision provides a real compelling alternative to that current approach in our culture. So because it has a long-term view, it has the commitment, it has that stability and security that I think we're all hungering for in this culture of ours.
Okay, we just have last two questions. Just over here.
Hi, Brad. My name's Irene. This question is for a friend. So, what is your say if a couple came back together again, but doesn't trust each other completely, but both are incredibly in love with each other? What is the chance of those two getting married? This is for a friend. This is not for me, guys.
Well, I think the point about trust, as I was alluding to just in terms of watching this new series, HBO Girls, is crucial because I think there are a lot of people out there who have that connection, that spark for one another, both romantic, emotional, sexual, whatever it might be. But if they don't have that trust in their relationship, they're going to have real difficulties in navigating married life. So the question is, how do you form and forge trust? And I think one crucial thing that you can do is to sacrifice for your partner. And the second thing you can do is to be embedded in a community that treats you and your relationship seriously. We know, for instance, that people who go to church together are less likely to be unfaithful to one another. We also know, too, that putting aside church, women and men who have overlapping friendship networks are much more likely to be faithful to one another because friends talk. And that overlapping network of friends can help foster, both in a good sense, but also kind of in a social control sense, responsible behavior and trust. So thinking not just about your own behavior, but also sort of what kind of social context are you in? Is it going to facilitate the growth of trust? So sacrifice and community, I think, are two keys to rebuilding trust.
This will be our last question for the evening.
Hi, thank you for your talk. My question's a two-parter. Firstly, I was wondering what the sample group of your research was, and secondly, if faith or marriages that occur within a faith context, if they have differences in regards to the quality of the marriages and the likelihood of success.
So I talked tonight about our new report called Not Yet. It's based upon a number of large national representative data sets in the United States, from the American Community Survey to the Ad Health Survey. So you can see it, Not Yet, all one word, .org is on the web. It has all the information you can get on that score. On the links between religion and marital success today, what we see basically is the couples who do share a common faith and who attend services together are the happiest and the most likely to go the distance to avoid divorce. But by contrast, couples where one spouse is strong commitment, to one tradition, and the other spouse has a commitment to a very different tradition, or is completely non-religious, are more likely to have difficulties. So the point is, it's not just religion, it's having a shared religious outlook that's important. And then some work that I've done more recently suggests it's even more important than shared church attendance is a strong personal sense that God is present in your marriage. Having a sense that God is working in and through your marriage, not surprisingly, is even a more powerful predictor of high quality marriages. So, not just sort of going through the motions, but really trying to discover and to experience the faith, in your marriage through shared prayer and other activities that ground a couple's spiritual faith.
Okay, let's have another round of applause for Mr. Wilcox. Thank you very much for your time.
Also about gaming, how a lot of young men spend a lot of hours just gaming. And so I think that we have to be sort of cognizant of the ways in which there are many behaviors today that are linked to our electronics. Maybe even the fact that I probably check my iPhone every couple of minutes on a regular basis, that we need to work on in terms of trying to sort of rein in these vices that can really distort our humanity and our ability to really relate to other people in an authentic way. And certainly pornography would be probably number one on that issue. But I think in terms of confession is one way of addressing that. Being involved in a community that will hold men accountable is the second way to address that issue. And trying to cultivate the virtue of prudence and avoiding situations that would put you into a the situation of temptation is a third thing to stress in that kind of context. But I would certainly say that you want to get that problem addressed before the wedding date, obviously, would be key.
Down the back. Yep.
Hi, my friend is very into religion. His particular situation is the girl he's deeply and very much in love with is not at the same level he is. She believes, however, she can be at a 30% level compared to his 100%. How does that play, and what is your opinion?
Well, I think my big concern when it comes to religion is whether or not they're on the same basic page. So if she is, say, Muslim and he is, evangelical Protestant, that would be a big problem. Whereas if she is Catholic and he's Catholic, I think it's much less of a problem. So the ideal is for folks to get married with a very strong shared faith orientation. That's both the happiest and the most stable approach to marriage. But in this world we live in, it's often hard to find that particular arrangement. So I think having a pretty clear understanding of what you're going to do after you get married in terms of particularly raising children is crucial. And marrying in the faith is ideal. And when you seemingly can't do that, you may have to discern if the person you're with, would be a good spouse. But if they have I think where I definitely would say I would advise against marriage is when one person is committed strongly to one faith, the other person is committed strongly to a different faith, or one is committed strongly to one faith, the other person is committed to secularism of one stripe or another. So if there's a kind of moderate commitment on the part of one and deep commitment on the part of the other, that's pretty good, not ideal, but pretty good. And that's the sort of typical pattern. But as I said, sort of what seems to work better is when he's older or when he's about the same age as his wife. So your grandfather's, case is just sort of the extreme expression, of one of those two patterns. But I would say, the bigger thing in that kind of situation is once again, do the friends and family think this is a wise idea? Because when two people are in a relationship, particularly at the beginning of that relationship, they often don't have a real perspective on it. There's a chemical reaction that sets in. People have a very strong attraction to one another. And that may cloud their judgment. And a concrete example I would give, I guess here in Australia you have Labour and the Liberal parties, correct? One's more conservative and one is more progressive. Well, when I was in college as a senior at the University of Virginia, we had the head of the college Republicans, our conservative party on campus, and a progressive senior woman. We were living in this sort of the quad, basically, at the center of our college. And they were both attractive people, and they were really attracted to one another, I think mainly physically. And they dated briefly, but there was no foundation for them in terms of a friendship. They had very different ideological viewpoints. So, the point I would make is that you want to make sure that the person that you're marrying is a great friend. And that, when you're both old and wrinkly on the front porch, in your 70s, you're going to have, a foundation of friendship that will sustain you, beyond that initial physical attraction.
I'll go one in the front here.
Hello, I'm also from America. Woo! Okay, so I'm just curious that, if you've got all your ducks in a row, you're satisfied with each other's, or you've got your money set up, you've got a great life for you, everybody's got good character, upstanding people, etc. Other than sort of Song of Songs, does the Bible really have that much to say about an emotional connection between people? Because I'm just looking, I didn't know about this, so this is my first time tonight, but I was actually just praying about it last night. I'm like, God, what does your Bible have to say about, connecting with another human being that you plan to spend the rest of your life with?
Well, I think it goes back to this question of friendship, and I would respond not necessarily in a biblical sense, but just to sort of make the point that in the larger sort of Catholic and classical tradition, we talk about the virtue of friendship. And Thomas Aquinas talks about, willing the good of the other. Well, I think it goes back to this question of friendship, and I would respond not necessarily in a biblical sense, but just to sort of make the point that in the larger sort of Catholic and classical tradition, we talk about the virtue of friendship. And Thomas Aquinas talks about, willing the good of the other. But part of willing the good of the other, I think, is having a common conception of the good life for yourselves as a couple. And so you want to have certain goods, whether it's the faith or a commitment to a certain political cause, or to, I don't know, bowling, or what's a popular sport here in Australia? What, cricket? Or cricket, okay? But there are these goods that you two can share as a couple that ground your friendship as a married couple. And I think if you have a strong friendship, the emotions typically will come along with that and will be part of that friendship. But at the same time, recognizing that grounding a marriage on emotions is not a particularly wise idea. Because there are going to be times in a marriage when your spouse annoys you, angers you, disappoints you, etc. And so you have to have a deeper commitment to willing the good of the other, willing the good of your spouse, if you hope to go the distance.
Okay, I've got another one in the same spot.
Unfortunately, these days, most young men are addicted to pornography. Do you think, like a lot of them, do you think it's okay for the girl for the woman to compromise and marry a guy who's addicted to pornography?
Well, the short answer is no. Yeah, it's a huge, pornography is a big issue. I was talking to a colleague this morning at the airport as we got off the plane, also about gaming, how a lot of young men spend a lot of hours just gaming. And so I think that we have to be sort of cognizant of the ways in which there are many behaviors today that are linked to our electronics. Maybe even the fact that I probably check my iPhone every couple of minutes on a regular basis, that we need to work on in terms of trying to sort of rein in these vices that can really distort our humanity and our ability to really relate to other people in an authentic way. And certainly pornography would be probably number one on that issue. But I think in terms of confession is one way of addressing that, being involved in a community, and the social and the cultural and religious power that marriage tends to offer adults and kids. Now, on the question of sex ed in school, frankly, I don't think in that, from the conservatives who would argue for abstinence and liberals who would say comprehensive sex education in the States, I don't think it's really either one. I don't think it's really that powerful. I think what's much more powerful is the popular culture and the peer culture that people find themselves in. Those two cultural forces, I think, are much more consequential in shaping how people think about and engage in sex, or in a minority context, don't engage in sex, before marriage.
Okay, one up here on your right.
Hey, howdy. In a practical way, what advice would you give to young couples that are trying to overcome the anxiety and fear associated with marrying at a young age, especially given the, I suppose, the social stigma of it all?
The social stigma of getting married young, you're saying? Or just of marriage in general?
Well, the fear of marriage at a young age.
Well, I would say a couple of things. One is that I think we have to recognize that, particularly I think for men, we tend to mature a little bit later than the ladies. And so it's not necessarily the worst in the world to wait a little bit for folks in their 20s to make sure that, especially the guy, I think, has the maturity to move forward. But it's also, I think, important too to think about your friends and your family. And as I sort of alluded to in the conclusion, we don't have a formal courtship approach in our culture anymore. But in lieu of that, groups like this, to some extent, can be helpful. So if you're dating, if you're courting someone, I think it's wise to kind of seek out the advice of your friends or family members who you trust and get their view of this person. If they give that person a thumbs up, it's probably a sign that this actually could be something that you should really move forward in terms of marriage. And then a third point that I would say is that you should be really integrated into a local church community, because folks who are getting married in their 20s who are not embedded in some kind of community that's going to give them support, counsel, and will be there for them when the times are tough, I think are going to have a much more difficult time of it than folks who are embedded in a real community of some sort. So those would be three things I think one can think about when it comes to getting married in your 20s today.
Salo down the front here.
Hi Brad, what happens statistically if you have, say, a bigger age gap between the male and female?
What we see historically in the research is that having men who are a bit older, that may cloud their judgment. And a concrete example I would give, I guess here in Australia you have Labour and the Liberal parties, correct? One's more conservative and one is more progressive. Well, when I was in college as a senior at the University of Virginia, we had the head of the college Republicans, our conservative party on campus, and a progressive senior woman. We were living in this sort of the quad, basically, the center of our college. And they were both attractive people, and they were really attracted to one another, I think mainly physically. And they dated briefly, but there was no foundation for them in terms of a friendship. They had very different ideological viewpoints. So, the point I would make is that you want to make sure that the person that you're marrying is a great friend. And that, when you're both old and wrinkly on the front porch, in your 70s, you're going to have, a foundation of friendship that will sustain you, beyond that initial physical attraction.
I'll go one in the front here.
Hello, I'm also from America. Woo! Okay, so I'm just curious that, if you've got all your ducks in a row, you're satisfied with each other's, or you've got your money set up, you've got a great life for you, everybody's got good character, upstanding people, etc. Other than sort of Song of Songs, does the Bible really have that much to say about an emotional connection between people? Because I'm just looking, I didn't know about this, so this is my first time tonight, but I was actually just praying about it last night. I'm like, God, what does your Bible have to say about, connecting with another human being that you plan to spend the rest of your life with?
Well, I think it goes back to this question of friendship, and I would respond not necessarily in a biblical sense, but just to sort of make the point that in the larger sort of Catholic and classical tradition, we talk about the virtue of friendship, and Thomas Aquinas talks about willing the good of the other. But part of willing the good of the other, I think, is having a common conception of the good life for yourselves as a couple. And so you want to have certain goods, whether it's the faith or a commitment to a certain political cause, or to, bowling, or what's a popular sport here in Australia? What, cricket? Or cricket, okay? But there are these goods that you two can share as a couple that ground your friendship as a married couple. And I think if you have a strong friendship, the emotions typically will come along of their child or their kids. And that can lead to any number of challenges. When people have kids with different partners, it's difficult to navigate the different parents, the financial obligations, trying to spend time with, a kid who you may not be living with at that point. So, the beauty of waiting to have kids until you're married and then staying married to the same person is that all that drama doesn't have to take place.
As a young Catholic man who's currently discerning marriage, would you have any good pickup lines or tips?
that her biggest concern about me was that I wasn't very funny. So I'm not gifted in that kind of department. The way that actually I met my wife was reading First Things, which is a journal of religion and public life. Probably can get First Things here, at least in the web, in Australia, in the library. I saw her reading it, I was reading it, and that was sort of the point of connection for us. So the point I'm making is that, part of it's about maybe saying certain things, but also can be about doing certain things that signal the kind of guy that you are to women that are in your environment that may notice that and appreciate that. So,
thanks, Mr. Wilcox, for coming. Firstly, have you had a cold beer yet? They're having cold over here.
No, I haven't had a cold one yet.
Oh, mate, you're going to get one of those in here. Listen, I was just wondering, what are your thoughts on intercultural relationships? How that, what kind of issues and what kind of statistics support an intercultural relationship, even if the religion's the same?
Well, I think we have this principle called homogamy in sociology, which basically means that similarity tends to facilitate stability. So the more similarities there are with, in your case, say a girlfriend, the better. And if there are tremendous, differences between sort of the way you were raised, or the culture that you were raised in, or community that you were raised in, and that your girlfriend was raised in, that's going to be a challenge, and you need to have your eyes wide open about that. But I would also say too that if you have a strong faith commitment as a couple, that commitment I think can certainly compensate for those challenges. But you should be, I think, clear-eyed and recognizing that, say, if you're dating a Filipina woman, for instance, that there are going to be some challenges to that are just,
and your partner and your future family. And in some ways, I think it might be a bit irresponsible to jump into that commitment and not have that, that protection, I guess. How can you justify that point?
It's a great question. And what I would say is that I think we have to also recognize, and this goes to the point about men in particular, and I'm glad that you asked this question as a young man, is that marriage tends to make guys, especially, more responsible. And so what we see is that after men get married, typically they work harder, they work longer hours, they make more money, and they're more strategic in how they approach their work. In part because they have the advice and counsel of a wife who's often probably wiser in the ways of the world than they are themselves. But no, concretely we know, for instance, that in the United States, and this is true though across much of the world, men who are unhappy with their jobs and who are not married are more likely just to quit without finding another job before they quit. Whereas men who are married will find the second job before they quit the first job. And that's just one example of how getting married actually changes men's behavior in ways that make them better workers, more strategic. So I think part of the idea is recognizing that marriage may actually be a gift to you that will enable you to be more intentional, more strategic, and more responsible about how you approach either your schooling or your work in ways that will redound both to your benefit but also to the benefit of your future family.
Hi, thanks for the talk so far. You touched on a point before about how, despite marriages being put off, children are still being conceived when adults are in their 20s. There was an article in the MX, which is a rather widely distributed newspaper, today about how contraception education has failed essentially in its current form because there are a lot of people between 18 and 25 who, despite using contraception, are still having about a 1 in 2 unintended pregnancy rate. And they blame this on the education system being focused on condoms and the pill rather than other types of contraception, so like temporary sterilizations and things like that. These kinds of things assume that sex is just going to happen for people in their 20s, and presumably these unintended pregnancies are happening outside of marriage. So after that long-winded introduction, my question is this problem with marriage being put off because of our culture's false view of sex? And is this...
I need to be responsible about it. And to be responsible about it, you want to have a stable job, you want to have money, I guess, to be able to afford to take care of yourself and your partner and your future family. And in some ways, I think it might be a bit irresponsible to jump into that commitment and not have that, I don't know, that protection, I guess. How can you justify that point?
It's a great question. And what I would say is that I think we have to also recognize, and this goes to the point about men in particular, and I'm glad that you asked this question as a young man, is that marriage tends to make guys especially more responsible. And so what we see is that after men get married, typically they work harder, they work longer hours, they make more money, and they're more strategic in how they approach their work. In part because they have the advice and counsel of a wife who's often probably wiser in the ways of the world than they are themselves. But no, I mean, concretely, we know, for instance, that in the United States, I think this is true though across much of the world, men who are unhappy with their jobs and who are not married are more likely just to quit without finding another job before they quit. Whereas men who are married will find the second job before they quit the first job. And that's just one example of how getting married actually changes men's behavior in ways that make them better workers, more strategic. So I think part of the idea is recognizing that marriage may actually be a gift to you that will enable you to be more intentional, more strategic, and more responsible about how you approach either your schooling or your work in ways that will redound both to your benefit but also to the benefit of your future family.
Hi, thanks for the talk so far. You touched on a point before about how, despite marriages being put off, children are still being conceived when adults are in their 20s. There was an article in the MX, which is a rather widely distributed newspaper, today about how contraception education has failed essentially in its current form because there are a lot of people between 18 and 25 who, despite using contraception, are still having about a 1 in 2 unintended pregnancy rate. And they blame this on the education system being focused on condoms and the pill rather than other types of contraception, so like temporary sterilizations and things like that. These kinds of things assume that sex is just going to happen for people in their 20s, and presumably these unintended pregnancies are happening outside of marriage. So